I have a neighbor that brought me his non-working tool shop 2.5 horsepower 6-gallon tank air compressor. And you can see that this is a model number AT01204-6. So I'm going to take it apart and see if I can fix it. You'll want to remove the plastic cover, which will also loosen up the air compressor itself. And that takes a couple of metric Allen screws and a Phillips screwdriver to remove the black plastic cover. I would recommend installing the 4 hex screws after the cover is removed to keep the air compressor attached to the tank. It makes it easier to handle things. And I'm going to have to drain the oil and do some investigation. We'll see what we find. I've taken apart the air compressor, and you'll see the cover and the gasket, the cylinder, the top of the piston wrist pin, and the reed valves and plates and gasket. And all of these had to be cleaned up because the primary problem was a broken connecting rod. This was the culprit. So now what do I do, because I need a part? Fortunately, I discovered, for my purposes, a nice replacement part. It turns out tool shop compressors were made in China, and the same company makes a Dewalt air compressor. And this is a diagram from the Dewalt Model D55166. In this Dewalt diagram, I needed item number 104, and a Dewalt part number is AB-9411011. So I ordered one up from my local Dewalt dealer for all of about $9 and change. And here's my new one, which I'm going to reassemble and get this air compressor to work. The key thing for you is that while your repair might be different on your tool shop compressor, these DeWalt parts are identical. I've now assembled the connecting rod, the piston, and the wrist pin, and installed it on the crankshaft. I'd like to point out that in this assembly procedure, it's important to orient the 3 piston rings so that their gaps are 120 degrees apart. It seals the piston and it balances the wear in the cylinder. We're going to next put in place the cylinder. Make sure to apply some oil to the piston and the rings and the connecting rod and the crankshaft and inside the piston bore. Now that we've slid that together, we can put the screws, tighten down the 2 hex socket cap screws with a metric 6mm hex wrench, hand tighten a little more, and we'll then put on the valves, gasket, and the cylinder head shortly. Next, I've installed the black gasket and the valve plate. The orientation of the valve plate is important, so make sure that it's oriented correctly. Now we're going to install the reed valves and the metal gasket. I've now placed the metal gasket and the reed valves, and next we can put the cylinder head in place. Not shown, however, is the other plate, which in my case stuck to the bottom side of the cylinder head. Put the 4 head bolts in place. Make sure that the metal gasket's lined up correctly, and hand start each of the 4 head bolts just to make sure that all of the threads line up through the gasket, through the valve plates, into the cylinder head. And with a 10mm socket, tighten them up and torque them to about 15 foot-pounds or 10 foot-pounds, give or take. They're relatively small bolts. And put the crankcase back in place. Fill it with about 8 to 10 ounces of 30 weight motor oil. Ought to be fine. And let's fire this puppy up and we'll see if it runs correctly. And yes, it does. So now we can put the cover back on. And I've got a working air compressor once again. Thanks for watching.